The night had just begun, and the city was alive with a quiet energy. The streets glowed with soft lights, and there was a calm breeze that touched the skin gently, like a whisper of something about to happen. People moved around in small groups, laughing, talking, carrying their own stories. But among all those lives, one story was about to take a turn that no one expected. It was a night when two souls, who had known each other for years but never truly crossed the bridge of unspoken feelings, finally came face to face with something real. Sandra Bullock had spent the entire day working. Her schedule was tight, her mind full of unfinished tasks, but her heart was strangely restless. When the evening came, she found herself sitting alone in her hotel room, staring at the city lights. She felt a weight she could not explain. It was not about her career, not about fame, not about the endless interviews. It was something deeper, a feeling that even with all her success, there was still a space inside her that remained empty. Keanu Reeves, on the other side of town, was also lost in thought. He had just finished a long conversation with a director, but his heart was not in it. As he walked out into the night, his eyes searched the streets like he was looking for something unseen. He had carried so many burdens silently, losing loved ones, facing grief that never really left him, but he had learned to smile through it. Yet tonight, he too felt the same restless pull that Sandra felt. Their paths crossed not by a grand plan, but by chance. Keanu had been invited to a small private gathering, a dinner arranged by a mutual friend. Sandra almost did not attend, but something inside told her she should go. When she walked into the room and saw him standing there, calm, quiet, with that gentle presence he carried everywhere, something shifted inside her. The hook of this night began with a single moment. Sandra's eyes caught Keanu's, and for a brief second, everything around them faded. The conversations, the laughter, the clinking of glasses all turned into a blur. It was just them, two people who had known each other for decades, yet had never allowed themselves to step into the unknown space between them. As they exchanged their first words that evening, there was an unusual warmth. Sandra smiled softly and said, "I didn't expect to see you here." Keanu looked at her with those kind eyes that always carried more than words could say. "I didn't expect to see you either, but maybe that's the best kind of surprise." Their conversation started simple, light, almost casual, but beneath each sentence was an unspoken weight. There were questions left unsaid, emotions carefully hidden for years. But the night had a strange power that seemed to pull those feelings closer to the surface. At one point, Sandra found herself laughing at one of his quiet jokes, and for the first time in weeks, she felt her shoulders relax. It was like being in his presence reminded her of something she had forgotten: comfort, safety, and the rare feeling of being seen without judgment. Keanu, in return, felt a quiet peace. He was a man used to carrying his own storms, but sitting beside her, the storms inside him seemed to calm down. As the night moved on, the dinner ended, and people began to leave. But Sandra and Keanu did not. They stepped outside together, walking down the quiet street, side by side. The air was cool, the city softer now. There was no spotlight, no cameras, no noise of fame. It was just two people, walking as if the world had been waiting for this moment for years. But the night was not meant to be simple. Sandra carried doubts inside her heart. She wondered if letting her guard down would only bring pain later. She had been hurt before. She had trusted and lost. Keanu, too, feared the same. His past had taught him that nothing lasts, that love often comes with loss. Yet, as they walked, both of them realized that the night was asking them to choose: stay silent forever, or open a door that could change everything. Their walk slowed near a small park. Sandra stopped and looked at the stars above. "Do you ever feel like life gives you moments, and if you don't take them, they never come back?" she asked softly. Keanu looked at her, the glow of the streetlight brushing against his face, and he nodded. "Yes, and I think this is one of those moments." Her heart skipped a beat. She wanted to look away, but his eyes held her. The silence between them was no longer empty. It was filled with something unspoken, but undeniable. The night had only just begun. but already it carried the weight of a lifetime. The silence after Keanu's words stayed with Sandra. She looked at him, her heart beating faster than it had in a long time. She had known him for years, seen him in so many different ways, on set, at events, in quiet conversations, but never like this. Never in a moment where the air itself felt heavy with unspoken truth. Sandra took a deep breath, trying to steady her emotions. "I don't know if I'm ready," she whispered more to herself than to him. Keanu heard her, though. His voice was calm, carrying a gentleness that always seemed to put others at ease. "Nobody is ever fully ready," he said softly, "but sometimes the heart knows before the mind does." They stood there under the soft glow of the streetlight, neither of them moving. Sandra thought about her past, the heartbreaks, the losses, the way life had sometimes left her feeling alone even in the middle of success. She thought about the way she had always built walls around her heart, telling herself it was safer to stay strong, safer to never let anyone too close. But now, standing with Keanu, she felt those walls tremble. Keanu was no stranger to pain, either. He carried his losses quietly, never showing the world the full weight of what he endured. Yet his silence was not empty. It was full of resilience, full of lessons about love, loss, and the quiet strength of simply moving forward. As he looked at Sandra, he saw not just the woman the world admired, but the person who, like him, had learned to endure. After a long pause, Sandra smiled faintly, her eyes reflecting both fear and hope. "You always say things that make me stop and think," she said. Keanu's lips curved into the smallest smile. "Maybe because I know what it feels like to be silent too long." They began walking again, slowly, the night wrapping around them like a quiet blanket. The park ahead was almost empty, the trees swaying gently in the breeze. They sat down on a wooden bench, side by side, neither of them rushing to fill the silence. It was strange, but the quiet between them felt safer than any words. Then Keanu broke it. "Do you ever regret not saying something when you had the chance?" he asked. His voice was low, but it carried weight. Sandra thought about it. Her mind traveled back to years ago when they were filming together, when there were small sparks between them that neither dared to name. She remembered nights when she wondered what could have happened if one of them had spoken. Her chest tightened as she whispered, "Yes, more times than I want to admit." Keanu nodded slowly. "Me too." Those two words hit her harder than she expected. She turned to face him, her eyes searching his. "You mean with me?" she asked carefully. He held her gaze, not flinching, not hiding. "Yes. With you." The world seemed to stop for her in that moment. Years of questions, of hidden feelings, of wondering if she was alone in her thoughts, suddenly found an answer. And the answer was standing right in front of her. Her breath shook slightly, but she tried to stay calm. "Why didn't you ever say anything?" she asked. Keanu lowered his eyes for a second, thinking carefully before speaking. "Because I thought maybe you deserved someone stronger. Someone who didn't carry so much pain. Someone who wouldn't bring storms into your life." He paused, then looked at her again. "But the truth is, I always wanted to. I just never wanted to risk losing the friendship we had." Sandra felt her chest tighten. She reached out without thinking, her hand brushing his. The simple touch sent a warmth through her, a reminder that sometimes connection is more powerful than fear. "I was afraid too," she admitted. Afraid of what it would mean. Afraid that maybe we were better off just staying the way we were. Keanu looked at her hand, then at her face. "And do you still believe that?" he asked quietly. She hesitated. The easy answer would have been yes, to keep everything safe, to walk away before the night could change their lives. But the truth was harder. The truth was that something deep inside her didn't want to let go this time. "I don't know," she whispered, her voice trembling. "But tonight, for the first time, I don't want to run from it." Keanu's eyes softened, and for a moment, he let himself smile. Not the polite smile he often gave the world, but a real, raw smile that carried all the emotions he usually hid. "Then maybe tonight is the night we finally stop running." The words hung in the air, fragile and powerful at the same time. Sandra felt tears sting her eyes, not from sadness, but from the overwhelming relief of hearing something she had waited years to hear. The night grew deeper, the stars brighter as they sat together on that bench. It was not a grand confession, not a scene out of a movie, but something far more real. Two people, scarred by life, finding courage to speak what they had buried for too long. But just as the weight of honesty settled between them, a new tension began to rise. Because opening hearts was only the first step, and the path ahead was still full of doubts, fears, and choices that could change everything. The bench beneath them felt heavier after the words they had just shared. Sandra leaned back slightly, her heart still racing, while Keanu sat quietly, his hands resting loosely on his knees. The night air was cool, but the space between them carried a warmth that neither of them could ignore. Sandra broke the silence first. "So what happens now?" Her voice was soft, almost unsure, like a question she wasn't sure she wanted answered. Keanu tilted his head, his eyes focused on the ground for a moment before he turned back to her. "I don't know," he admitted honestly. "Maybe we just keep walking. Maybe we just see where this night wants to take us." His answer wasn't grand, it wasn't filled with promises, but it was real. It was exactly who he was. Honest, grounded, unwilling to say more than he truly felt. Somehow, that gave Sandra comfort. They stood up together and began to walk deeper into the park. The trees swayed gently above them, their branches stretching like open arms. In the distance, a fountain glowed under dim lights, its water catching the moon's reflection. It felt almost cinematic, yet more personal than any scene either of them had ever filmed. As they walked, Sandra's mind wandered back to the past. She remembered the first time she met him, the way his quiet nature contrasted with his strength, how he always listened more than he spoke. She remembered the nights on set, the laughter they shared, the moments when she caught him looking at her as if he wanted to say something but never did. She realized she had carried those memories for years, locked away in a hidden part of her heart. Keanu, too, was thinking about the past. He thought about the nights he had gone home alone, wondering what life would have been if he had dared to say what he felt. He thought about the moments when he almost picked up the phone to call her, but chose silence instead. Now, walking beside her, he wondered if all those missed chances had led them here, to this one night where fate seemed to give them another chance. They reached the fountain and sat down on its edge. The sound of water filled the quiet, steady, and calming. Sandra placed her hands in her lap, looking at the ripples. "Sometimes I feel like people see us as something we're not," she said. "They see the fame, the smiles, the perfect lives. But inside, we're just as lost as anyone else." Keanu nodded. "People don't see the weight we carry. They don't see the nights when silence feels heavier than noise." Their eyes met again, and this time the silence between them was full of understanding. There was no need to explain further. They both knew what it meant to live in the spotlight and still feel alone. But then, Sandra's face grew thoughtful, and a new fear crept into her voice. What if this doesn't work? What if we open up and it just breaks us? Keanu didn't answer right away. He looked at the fountain, at the water flowing endlessly, never stopping. Then he said, "Everything in life can break us. But maybe the point isn't to avoid breaking. Maybe it's about finding someone who helps you heal when you do." His words landed deep inside her. She felt tears forming, but she quickly brushed them away. "You always make it sound so simple," she whispered. "Maybe that's because it is," he said quietly. For a while, they just sat there, the sound of the fountain filling the space between them. Then, unexpectedly, Keanu stood up and offered his hand. "Come on," he said. Sandra looked at him, curious. "Where are we going?" He smiled faintly. "To keep walking. The night isn't done yet." She hesitated for a second, then placed her hand in his. His hand was warm, steady, and as they began walking again, she felt a strength flow into her. They walked through the winding paths of the park until they reached a small bridge that overlooked the city lights. From there, the view was breathtaking. Tall buildings glowing against the night sky, cars moving like streams of light, the heartbeat of the city alive beneath them. Sandra leaned on the railing, her eyes on the horizon. Do you ever wonder why life brings people back together after so many years? She asked softly. Keanu stood beside her, his gaze steady on the view. Maybe because some connections never really go away. They just wait for the right time to return. His words made her chest ache in a way that was both painful and comforting. She realized that this night wasn't just about what was happening now. It was about everything that had led them here. The missed chances, the silences, the unspoken words. All of it had built up to this moment on the bridge. Yet even as her heart pulled her closer to him, her mind whispered doubts. She worried about what the world would say, about the headlines, about the pressure of eyes watching them. But when she looked at him, calm and steady, she realized that maybe the world didn't matter tonight. Maybe only this moment did. She turned to him and asked the question she had been holding back. Do you want this? Really want this? Because if you do, I need to hear it. Keanu's eyes locked onto hers. His voice was firm but gentle, carrying no hesitation. Yes, I want this. I've wanted this for longer than I can admit. Her heart skipped again, and for the first time that night she let herself smile fully. It wasn't a smile for cameras. It wasn't for anyone else. It was just for him. But just as the weight of truth settled between them, the sound of her phone buzzing in her pocket broke the moment. She looked at it, unsure if she should answer, while Keanu watched silently. The outside world was calling, and with it came the reminder that nights like this were fragile, easily broken by reality. The sound of the phone rang sharp against the quiet night, and Sandra froze. Her hand hovered over the pocket, torn between answering and ignoring it. She glanced at Keanu, her eyes searching his for guidance, but he stayed calm, letting her decide. Finally, with a small sigh, she pulled it out. The screen lit up with a familiar name, her manager. She felt her chest tighten. She knew what it meant. Even at this hour, there were always questions. Always demands, always people pulling her back into the world of work. Are you going to answer it? Keanu asked gently. Sandra shook her head slowly. Not tonight, she whispered, sliding the phone back into her pocket. Keanu nodded, and there was a quiet respect in his eyes. Sometimes the most important choice is saying no, he said softly. She smiled faintly, relieved at his understanding. I just don't want to lose this moment, she admitted. It feels too rare. His gaze lingered on her, steady and kind. Then let's not lose it. They stayed on the bridge a little longer, watching the city lights, letting the weight of the moment sink in. Then they continued walking, this time without words. The silence wasn't heavy. It was alive, filled with unspoken comfort. As they moved deeper into the park, the noise of the city grew softer. They found themselves near a small garden, almost hidden, where lanterns glowed dimly along the path. The place felt secret, untouched, as if the world had saved it just for them. Sandra stopped, her eyes drawn to the lanterns. It feels like a different world here, she said. Keanu glanced around, then back at her. Maybe that's what we need tonight, a world without expectations. She sat on a stone bench, her shoulders finally relaxing, while Keanu leaned against a nearby tree. The quiet stretched between them again, but this time Sandra felt a question pressing inside her. Keanu, she began, her voice careful. Why now? After all these years, why tonight? He took a deep breath, his eyes fixed on the lantern light flickering across the path. Because I'm tired of silence. I've spent too much of my life watching moments pass, telling myself it wasn't the right time. But when is it ever the right time? Life doesn't wait, and neither should we. His words struck her deeply. She thought of all the times she had convinced herself to stay quiet, all the times she had hidden her feelings behind work, behind laughter, behind strength. Now she realized that maybe she had been waiting for someone to remind her that it was okay to want more. Her eyes softened, and she leaned forward. Do you ever wonder if we wasted too much time? Keanu's lips curved into the faintest smile. Maybe. But maybe the time we spent apart is the reason this moment feels so real now. We're not the same people we were back then. We're stronger, we're wiser, and maybe now we're ready. Sandra felt a lump in her throat, her emotions rising like a tide she couldn't control. She wanted to argue, to say they should have found each other sooner, but deep down, she knew he was right. They sat together under the soft glow of the lanterns, and Sandra finally let her guard down. She told him about the loneliness that sometimes crept into her nights, about the weight of always being strong for others. Keanu listened without interrupting, his quiet presence telling her that she didn't need to carry it all alone. Then he shared his truth. He spoke of the grief he had carried for years, of the people he had loved and lost, of the silence that had often been his only companion. His voice never broke, but the depth of his words was heavier than any tears. Sandra's heart ached for him. Without thinking, she reached out and placed her hand over his. "You don't have to carry it all by yourself anymore," she whispered. He looked at her hand on his, and for the first time that night, his calm mask slipped. His eyes glistened, and she saw the raw truth of a man who had carried too much pain in silence. The lantern light flickered between them, and in that moment, it felt as if the world had disappeared. It was just two souls, no walls, no guards, no lies, only truth. Keanu squeezed her hand gently. "And you don't have to either," he said softly. A tear slipped down Sandra's cheek, but she didn't hide it. She let it fall because with him, she didn't feel the need to be perfect. She didn't feel the need to pretend. For a long time, they stayed like that, hands together, hearts open. It wasn't about promises of forever. It wasn't about what tomorrow would bring. It was about this night, this fragile and powerful night that belonged only to them. But even in their closeness, a shadow lingered. The world outside was waiting, with its noise, its eyes, its judgments. And they both knew that once this night ended, they would have to face it. The garden, with its soft lantern glow, felt like a safe world. But safety could never last forever. As they sat together, hands still joined, Sandra's phone buzzed again. This time she didn't pull it out. The sound alone reminded her that no matter how far she tried to run, the world outside would always try to find her. Keanu noticed the look in her eyes, the way her smile faded for a moment. "You're thinking about tomorrow," he said quietly. Sandra nodded, her voice low. "I'm thinking about what happens when this night ends, about the headlines, about the people who will make stories out of something they can never understand." Keanu leaned back slightly, his expression calm but serious. "We can't live for them, Sandra. We can't let their noise decide what this means for us." She knew he was right, but the fear inside her wasn't so easy to silence. She had built her life carefully, balancing her career, her family, her image. The thought of opening her heart and having it exposed to the world terrified her. "I don't know if I'm strong enough to handle it," she admitted. "It feels like if we take this step, everything could break." Keanu's eyes softened, and he spoke with the steady patience that defined him. "Maybe it will break. Maybe not. But even if it does, at least it will be real. At least it will be ours." His words settled in her chest like a weight she didn't want to carry but couldn't ignore. She turned her head, staring at the glowing lanterns, wishing life could stay this simple. After a while, they left the garden and began walking back toward the streets. The quiet paths gave way to the sound of cars, voices, the hum of the city that never fully slept. Sandra felt her heart tighten again as the noise grew louder. When they reached the edge of the park, a small group of people passed by. One of them looked up, eyes widening slightly as they recognized the two figures walking side by side. There was no camera, no phone lifted yet, but the look alone was enough to remind Sandra of how fragile their privacy was. Her steps slowed, but Keanu noticed and stayed close. "Don't let it scare you," he whispered. "Just keep walking." They did, but the tension followed her. Once they reached the quiet of a side street, Sandra stopped and leaned against a wall, pressing a hand to her chest. "Keanu, I don't know if I can do this. Not with the whole world watching." He stepped in front of her, his eyes steady on hers. "You don't have to decide everything tonight," he said gently. "Tonight doesn't have to be about the world. Tonight can just be about us." His calmness steadied her again, and she took a deep breath. "But what if I lose you because of it? What if the pressure pushes us apart before we even begin?" Keanu shook his head slowly. Then we fight for it. We don't let them take it from us. His conviction made her heart ache in a different way, an ache born of hope. She realized that while fear held her back, his quiet strength kept pulling her forward. They walked further until they reached a small cafe that was still open, its lights soft and warm against the dark street. Keanu suggested they go inside, and Sandra agreed. It was quiet, almost empty, with only a few people sitting at distant tables. They chose a corner seat, away from the windows. For the first time all night, they sat across from each other, really facing each other without distraction. The silence between them wasn't heavy now. It was waiting, expecting something deeper. Sandra spoke first. "Do you ever think about how different our lives could have been if we had chosen this years ago?" Keanu's eyes held hers. "Yes, I think about it more than I should. But maybe back then we weren't ready. Maybe we needed all these years to learn what we know now. And what do we know now?" she asked softly. "That life is short," he said. "That people leave, moments pass, and chances don't come twice. And that when something feels this real, you don't walk away from it." His words cut straight into her heart, and for the first time that night she felt something shift inside her. Her fear was still there, but hope was stronger. She lowered her eyes for a moment, then looked back at him. "You make it sound so clear," she whispered. Keanu leaned forward slightly, his voice quiet but steady. "Because it is clear, Sandra. At least to me." Her throat tightened. She wanted to believe him, to step fully into what her heart wanted, but a part of her still clung to fear. Before she could speak again, the cafe door opened and two people walked in. One of them froze, recognizing Sandra instantly, then noticed Keanu sitting across from her. Their eyes widened, and Sandra felt the air change. The stranger didn't raise a phone, didn't take a picture, but the look alone was enough to remind her that their night was not theirs alone anymore. The world was creeping in, faster than either of them wanted. She looked at Keanu, panic flickering in her eyes. He noticed, and he reached across the table, placing his hand gently over hers. "Look at me," he said softly. She did, and in his eyes she found something steady, something safe. "Let them look," he whispered. "Tonight, we're not hiding." The air inside the cafe grew heavy after the strangers noticed them. Sandra's shoulders tensed, her heart pounding as she imagined headlines being written in real time. She felt the old fear rising, the fear of being exposed, judged, misunderstood. Keanu, however, remained calm. His hand stayed on hers, steady and reassuring, as if telling her that no matter what storm was coming, she would not face it alone. The two strangers whispered to each other but didn't pull out their phones. After a moment, they simply ordered coffee and sat at a table far away. Still, the damage was done. Sandra's peace had been shaken. She leaned closer to Keanu, her voice low. "This is exactly what I was afraid of. We can't even share one night without the world watching." Keanu studied her face, his expression soft but unshaken. "Sandra, the world has always been watching. But that doesn't mean we have to live for their eyes." She wanted to believe him, but the weight of years in the spotlight had taught her differently. She sighed deeply. "You don't understand. For women, it's different. People judge, they twist stories, they make us into something we're not. And once it's out there, it never goes away." Keanu didn't argue. Instead, he nodded slowly, showing her that he understood. "Then let them talk. Let them write. At the end of the day, only we know what's real, and that's all that should matter." His certainty gave her a flicker of strength. She took a deep breath, reminding herself that maybe he was right. Maybe this night was not meant to be lived in fear. The waiter brought their drinks, and for a while they sat quietly, sipping coffee, letting the warmth calm their nerves. Keanu's steady presence slowly eased her tension, until she finally managed a small smile. "You always have this way of making me feel safe," she said, softly. "Maybe because I know what it feels like not to be." He replied. Their eyes held each other for a long moment, and Sandra felt a deep shift inside. She realized that what scared her most was not the world. It was the possibility of losing what was sitting right in front of her. After they finished, they stepped out of the cafe and back into the night. The streets were quieter now, the city calming down as the hour grew late. They walked side by side, closer than before, their shoulders almost touching. As they reached a quiet corner, Sandra stopped and turned to him. Her eyes were searching, filled with both fear and longing. "Keanu, what if we wake up tomorrow and regret this? What if it feels different in the daylight?" He shook his head gently. "The truth doesn't change with daylight. If it's real now, it will be real tomorrow." She bit her lip, tears threatening to form. "And if it's too hard? If the world makes it too hard?" Keanu's voice was steady, but there was fire behind it. "Then we fight for it. Because I would rather fight with you than spend another day in silence." The conviction in his words broke something open inside her. For years, she had carried her fears alone, always protecting herself. Now, for the first time, someone was offering to carry them with her. Her chest tightened, and before she could stop herself, she stepped closer, closing the small space between them. Her hand rested gently on his chest, feeling the steady rhythm of his heart. "Why do you always know what to say?" she whispered. Keanu smiled faintly. "Because I mean it." Their eyes held for what felt like forever, the city lights glowing around them, the night air heavy with emotion. Slowly, Sandra let her guard down completely. She leaned her forehead against his, closing her eyes, letting the moment take her. For Keanu, it was the moment he had been waiting for all night. He wrapped his arms around her gently, holding her not as an actor or a public figure, but simply as a man who had found someone who understood his silence. They stayed like that for a long time, breathing together, hearts steadying each other. But even in that closeness, they both knew this night was not over. There was still a choice waiting for them, a choice between stepping back into silence or stepping forward into something the world would never ignore. The night was almost gone. The city had grown quieter, the streets less crowded, the stars above more visible against the dark sky. Sandra and Keanu stood close, their foreheads touching, both of them knowing that the moment they were in could not last forever. Time was moving forward, and with it came the truth they could no longer avoid. Sandra pulled back slightly, her eyes filled with both strength and fear. "Keanu, we can't pretend this night exists in a bubble. When the sun rises, the world will know. And once they know, everything changes." He nodded slowly. "You're right. It will change. But maybe that's not something to fear. Maybe that's what we've been avoiding for too long." She looked at him, searching for hesitation, but found none. His calmness steadied her again, but still, she needed more than calmness. She needed courage. "What if they don't understand?" she asked softly. Keanu's voice was steady, his words like an anchor. "They don't need to understand. They don't live our lives. We do." His answer settled deep in her chest. She realized then that she had spent so much of her life living for others, pleasing, protecting, hiding. But this night was different. This night was asking her to finally live for herself. They began walking again, side by side, until they reached a small rooftop terrace above the cafe. It was empty, quiet, and from there they could see the city stretch endlessly before them. The lights shimmered like a sea of stars, and the cool air carried the weight of truth. Sandra leaned on the railing, looking out at the horizon. "Do you think we'll regret this?" Keanu stood beside her, his gaze steady on the skyline. "No," he said firmly. "I think the only regret would be not letting ourselves try." His words echoed in her mind, breaking down the last of her walls. She turned to face him, her eyes wet but steady. "Then let's not waste any more time." His expression softened, and for the first time, he let his emotions show fully. The calm mask he always wore slipped away, revealing the man beneath. The man who had carried so much grief, but still chose to believe in hope. Slowly, he reached out and took her hand. She let him, her fingers intertwining with his. The simple gesture felt like the most powerful promise they could make. They stood there in silence, hand in hand, the city glowing around them. And for the first time in years, Sandra felt no fear. She felt free. But then, as if fate wanted to test them one last time, the sound of voices rose from the street below. A small group had gathered, their eyes lifted toward the terrace. Sandra's chest tightened as she realized what was happening. People had seen them. She turned to Keanu, panic flickering in her eyes. "It's starting," she whispered. He squeezed her hand, his eyes steady. "Then let it start. We're not hiding anymore." The weight of his words sank into her. She felt her heart racing, but instead of stepping back, she stepped closer. Together, they stood at the edge of the terrace, visible, unafraid. The voices below grew louder, some surprised, some cheering, some just curious. But none of it mattered. What mattered was the choice they had made, the choice to stop living in fear. Sandra leaned her head gently against Keanu's shoulder, her eyes closing as she let herself finally rest. For years, she had carried the burden of strength, of hiding her vulnerability. But now, in this single night, she allowed herself to be seen for who she was. Keanu wrapped an arm around her, holding her close. He didn't speak because words were no longer needed. His presence was enough, his silence full of promise. As the night slowly gave way to dawn, the first light of morning touched the horizon. The city began to wake, but on that rooftop, Sandra and Keanu felt as though they were standing in a different world, a world where fear no longer ruled them, where silence no longer held them back. For years they had carried their truths alone, hiding behind smiles and silence. But now, in the quiet of dawn, they chose courage. They chose each other. And though the world outside would talk, would judge, would twist the story, none of it could change the simple fact that on this night, they had finally found the courage to be real.